can vote to reject Judge Kavanaugh's nomination and ask the President to send the Senate another name. For the sake of the Senate, of the Supreme Court, and of America, I hope, I pray, my colleagues will do so.
You've been listening to Senator Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. We now await Leader McConnell. He'll be making remarks shortly. Meanwhile, I want to bring in a close personal friend of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, David McIntosh. He's the president of the Club for Growth, a personal friend of his, of Kavanaugh's. He also attended Yale, although not at the same time. David, your thoughts as we await this key procedural vote to confirm your friend, Brett Kavanaugh, that's just moments away.
It's very clear by what Chuck Schumer was saying and Dianne Feinstein what their agenda is, and that is to deny President Trump any nominee by stalling, delaying, and using the worst personal smear tactics on a man who has superb character. Every time I've seen him, he's exhibited that type of superb character, and his friends have come forward to say that, but they've smeared him instead because they want to stop President Trump from nominating him and anybody else to the Supreme Court.
David McIntosh, thank you for your time this morning. Let's listen now to Leader McConnell. He's taken to the floor.
Consequential votes you ever cast in the Senate. Now, the stakes are always high for a Supreme Court nomination, but colleagues, the extraordinary events of recent weeks have raised them even higher this time. When we vote later this morning, we will not only be deciding whether to elevate a stunningly well-qualified judge to our highest court, not anymore, not after all this, the United States Senate will also be making a statement. We'll either state that partisan politics can override the presumption of innocence, or we'll reaffirm that in the United States of America, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. We'll either state that facts and evidence can simply be brushed aside when politically inconvenient, and signal that media bullying and mob intimidation are valid tactics for shaping the Senate. The mob can attack, and the Senate caves. Or we'll stand up and say that serious, thoughtful, fact-based deliberation will still define this body. We'll either give notice that totally uncorroborated allegations are now officially enough to destroy an American's life, or we'll declare that our society cannot, must not, will not set the bar so low. So, Madam President, today is a pivotal day in the nomination process of this excellent judge. But it's a pivotal day for us here in the Senate as well. The ideals of justice that have served our nation so well for so long are on full display. So let's step back and sample a few of the choice moments that the Senate and the American people have been treated to during the disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful spectacle of the last 2 weeks. The very night Judge Kavanaugh was announced as the president's choice, we heard the junior senator from Oregon declare that this nominee would pave the way to tyranny. His audience? Crowds of far-left protesters still filling in the blanks on their picket signs. They weren't quite sure who the nominee was going to be yet. We've heard the junior senator from New Jersey describe Judge Kavanaugh's nomination as a great moral struggle in which there are just two camps. You're either complicit in the evil or you're fighting against it. More recently, we've heard the junior senator from Hawaii argue that her personal disagreement with Judge Kavanaugh's judicial philosophy meant, now listen to this, he deserved less of a presumption of innocence when it came to allegations of misconduct. If you disagree with her, You're not entitled to the presumption of innocence when it comes to allegations of misconduct. That's from a member of the Judiciary Committee? That's the definition of due process? Apparently you get due process only if you agree with her. And even more recently, we saw the junior senator from Rhode Island hold forth with great confidence, offering his expert interpretations of goofy jokes in high school yearbooks from the early 1980s. That was incredibly enlightening. Innocent jokes? Beer drinking references? Oh, no. Our colleague was quite positive there must be some other hidden or sinister meanings at play. Until, of course, a number of Judge Kavanaugh's classmates set him straight earlier this week. So stop and consider these snapshots. The absurdity, the indignity. This is our approach to confirming a Supreme Court justice? This is the Senate's contribution to public discourse? Before the ink had dried on Justice Kennedy's retirement, our Democratic colleagues made it perfectly clear what this process would be about: delay, obstruct, and resist. And before the ink had dried on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination, colleagues across the aisle, including Democratic members of the Judiciary Committee, were racing to announce they had made up their minds and were totally opposed to his confirmation. Mere hours after Judge Kavanaugh was nominated, my friend, the Democratic leader, promised, quote, "I will oppose him with everything I've got," he said, hours after he was nominated. It was thus abundantly clear that his number one political goal was to defeat the nomination by any means necessary. It was right there from the beginning, Madam President. A clear declaration, plain as day. Nothing could get most Democrats to consider this nominee with an open mind. It would be delaying tactics, obstruction, and so-called resistance until the final vote was called. For a few weeks, their efforts played out along lines that sadly have become somewhat ordinary around here. There were excuses for delay. Those fell flat. There were gross distortions of Judge Kavanaugh's record that were batted down by outside fact checkers. And there were all the usual phony apocalyptic pronouncements that are shouted whenever a Republican president dares to nominate a Supreme Court justice. Happened every time. Hostile to women, hostile to vulnerable people, hostile to workers. Same old tricks, same old playbook. But here was the problem. The old plays weren't working. The distortions were being literally drowned out by the facts. Senators received and reviewed more pages of background materials on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination than for every previous Supreme Court nomination combined. We read Judge Kavanaugh's 12-year record of judicial rulings from our nation's second highest court, 300-plus opinions. We heard sworn testimony, written accounts from hundreds of character witnesses from all stages of Judge Kavanaugh's life and career. And the picture painted by these facts was nothing like the caricature. Nothing like the caricature. So it was clear, Madam President, the old tactics weren't working. Wasn't going to get the job done. The resistance demanded more. Try something new, they said. Well, we all know what happened next. Uncorroborated allegations of the most sensitive, most serious sort were quickly sharpened into political weapons. One such allegation, shared by Dr. Ford in confidence with the Democratic side of the Judiciary Committee, somehow, mysteriously, found its way into the press. Well, Chairman Grassley immediately set out on a sober, focused search for the truth. The committee collected testimony, organized a new hearing, and most recently asked for the supplemental FBI background investigation, Judge Kavanaugh's seventh FBI investigation. By any fair standard, the facts, the actual facts, proved to be straightforward. No corroborating evidence, none, was produced to support any of the allegations leveled against Judge Kavanaugh. No corroborating evidence from the FBI inquiry or from anywhere else. Nothing. Well, that wasn't enough for our Democratic colleagues, of course. The facts were not exactly the point. After all, we sort of get it by now. When the very FBI investigation for which they'd been clamoring turned up no new evidence, the Democrats moved the goalposts yet again. I believe the latest story is that the whole investigation is invalid. Now listen to this, because individuals who had only recently been told secondhand or thirdhand about nearly 40-year-old allegations weren't treated as essential witnesses. Let me say that again. The latest story is that the whole investigation is invalid because individuals who had only recently been told secondhand or thirdhand about nearly 40-year-old allegations weren't treated as essential witnesses. Never mind that they didn't actually witness anything. They didn't witness anything. So let's be clear, Madam President, these are not witnesses. These are people supposedly in possession of hearsay that they first heard 35 years after the supposed fact. What nonsense. The people whom Dr. Ford claimed were witnesses, they have spoken with the FBI. We know that because they, through their attorneys, put out public statements saying so. And what we know now is what we knew at this time a week ago. There is absolutely no corroborating evidence for these allegations. Same thing we heard a week ago. If they were, you bet we'd have heard about it, but there isn't. So notwithstanding that, Madam President, the leak of Dr. Ford's letter in violation of her privacy and against her wishes opened the floodgates. The feeding frenzy was full on. The weaponization of her letter by the left led to a torrent of other equally uncorroborated allegations. They were dumped on Judge Kavanaugh and his family. And breathlessly, the media seized on them. The more outlandish, the better. Americans were informed that Judge Kavanaugh masterminded violent drug gangs as a young teenager until that accuser walked her story back. We were informed that Judge Kavanaugh beat someone up on a boat in a Rhode Island harbor until that accuser totally recanted. We heard another tall tale of physical assault until that account was thoroughly debunked by a sitting federal judge. Oh, and yes, we were informed that juvenile jokes in his high school yearbook were actually sinister, secret references. All the Keystone cops were on the case. Keystone cops were on the case, Madam President. And Senate Democrats cheered them on. They read parts of this uncorroborated, unbelievable mudslide into the Senate record. They cited them in an official letter demanding that Judge Kavanaugh's nomination be withdrawn. Were they true? Well, of course, that was quite beside the point. Quite beside the point. So long as they were convenient. Every effort was made to ensure that the fact-free verdict of the mob and the media would win out over the actual evidence. Make sure the mob prevails. But the uncorroborated mud and the partisan noise and the physical intimidation of members here in the Senate will not have the final say around here. The Senate will have the final say. So, Madam President, we're almost at the end of the runway. The crosswinds of anger and fear and partisanship have blown strong these past weeks. They've harmed a good man and his family. They've tarnished the dignity of this institution. But all of it can end today. The time has come to vote. The Senate stands on the threshold of a golden opportunity. We have the opportunity to advance the nomination of an incredibly well-qualified and well-respected jurist to a post that demands such excellence. We have the opportunity to put Judge Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, where his distinguished service will make us and our nation proud for years to come. But we have the opportunity to do even more. Today, we can send a message to the American people that some core principles remain unfettered by the partisan passions of this moment. Facts matter. Fairness matters. The presumption of innocence is sacrosanct. The Senate has turned its back on these things before, Madam President, but never for long, and never without deep regret. This institution does not look back proudly on the era of Joseph McCarthy, nor on any of the other times when the politics of personal destruction poisoned its judgment. No, the Senate looks back on those things with shame and with the conviction that we cannot go down that road again. We know the Senate is better than this. We know the nation deserves better than this. By confirming Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, this brilliant jurist will be charged with upholding the rule of law and honoring American justice. We must hold ourselves to that very same standard. We must seize the golden opportunity before us today to confirm a Supreme Court justice who will make us proud, and to reaffirm our own commitment to the justice that every single American deserves.
Exhausted.
As a reminder to our
Leader McConnell wrapping up his remarks on the Senate floor ahead of this key procedural vote. It is expected to happen at any moment now. This is the vote to invoke cloture to end the debate on the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh. This is a simple majority vote, and we await that to begin now.
Mitch McConnell saying no corroborating evidence from the FBI, then referring to Democrats as the Keystone Cops were on the case. I want to drop in here. We're not quite sure how we will hear the vote itself. Mike Emanuel is waiting in the wings on Capitol Hill. Just want to bring in Mike for a moment here and just give us a sense, Mike, of how this will proceed now.
Well, they'll call the roll, Bill, and you'll hear the senators' names, and you'll hear them say aye or nay. And basically, old-fashioned, we will count the votes as they come through. Obviously, lawmakers have known that this was the time, 10:30, and you've seen them file into their desks there on the Senate floor. And so we expect this to be rather timely, but timing on the United States Senate floor is not always Swiss. It's supposed to be a 15-minute vote, but you would think with this level of anticipation, it would happen pretty promptly, and we would have a sense whether they would advance the nomination.
It is voice vote, Mike. Let's listen.
Mrs. Capito. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn. Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Daines. Mr. Donnelly. Ms. Duckworth. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Ernst. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Fisher. Mr. Flake. Mr. Gardner. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Aye. Mr. Grassley.
Aye.
Ms. Harris. No. Ms. Hassan. Mr.
As we await the final tally, we do know what the critical votes, now that they have been cast. And for the moment, Brett Kavanaugh's nomination lives.
Keep in mind that senators do sometimes, as our own Chad Pergram points out, they sometimes vote to bring the debate to a close, which has been the indication from Susan Collins. She has announced that she's voted yes, but that she is going to make a further announcement on how she's going to vote tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern Time.
Back inside.
Mr. Carper.
Senator's not recorded.
I vote no.
Mr. Carper, no.
Are there any senators in the chamber who wish to change their vote? As a reminder to our guests in the galleries, expressions of approval or disapproval are not permitted in the Senate galleries. Thank you. On this vote, the yeas are 51, the noes are 49. The motion is agreed to.
There it is. Brett Kavanaugh now will proceed to a final vote in all likelihood Saturday afternoon. But again, there is a critical announcement expected at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. That on behalf of Susan Collins, the Republican from Maine, where she has already announced that she will advance the motion for now, but will make a final decision public at 3 o'clock today. So for Sandra Smith, Bill Hemmer here in New York City, to all of our Fox stations watching across the country, stay tuned to the Fox News channel and this Fox station for our ongoing coverage on this story. But for now, from New York, we will say goodbye for the moment. Meanwhile, on cable, our coverage continues, Sandra.
All right, now we want to bring in our guest. Greg Nunziata joins us now. He's the former Chief Nominations Counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Greg, if you could, just tell us your thoughts in this moment right now.
Well, this is about as riveting as the Senate floor gets. A high-stakes vote, which could go either way. You saw every senator was at their desk. That happens very, very rarely, and it just kind of shows the gravity of this. We were looking at 4 senators who could have gone either way. Brett Kavanaugh needed the support of 2 to advance his nomination today, and he got 3 of the 4. As I think has been explained a few times, today's vote doesn't necessarily tell you how the final vote is going to come out. Technically, the vote was just whether or not to have a final vote tomorrow. So we'll need to hear from some of those 4 senators on what their final decision is. It could be that you're willing to end the debate, but not willing to vote yes to confirm. It could be that you're against ending the debate now, you want more time, but if forced to it, you will vote to confirm. So we're going to want to hear from Murkowski and Collins and Manchin about what the next step is.
Would you expect Murkowski to vote no here and then vote yes in a final vote?
I would not expect that or predict that, but it's not impossible.
Okay. Now, if Susan Collins will address her vote at 3 o'clock this afternoon, my guess is we'll get a schedule from Joe Manchin at some point, too. And he will have his chance on the floor also, Greg.
Absolutely.
So
so it's still down to Kavanaugh needs 2 of those 4 tomorrow to get confirmed.
Greg, give us an idea of what happens now. This 30-hour window opens. It's a limitation of 30 hours. It's the maximum that the senators can go here. And then the final confirmation will take place at the earliest sometime tomorrow afternoon, on a Saturday afternoon. What happens now? What do those senators go do? What is the conversations that are had? I mean, still, as you're pointing out, a lot can change.
Yeah, so Certainly, the Senate doesn't need to take the next 30 hours, but throughout this process on Kavanaugh, they have taken every last minute and pushed things along further into the weeks as possible. So I would expect that they will take all 30 hours. During that time, senators will have the opportunity to speak. I suspect many will. It's a really important vote, maybe a career-defining vote for some of these senators. So you could expect a number of speeches as they lay out their case for and against. And there'll be a lot of conversations between the senators, particularly focusing on those remaining undecided votes and trying to line them up for our final decision tomorrow.
Greg, thank you. Stand by, okay? We're going to bring in a few more voices right now. I want to bring in our A-team, Ed Henry, Fox News chief national correspondent, always in touch with the White House, Caprica Farah, former Ohio Senate Democratic Minority Leader, now executive residence at American University School of Public Affairs, David Asman, co-host of After the Bell on Fox Business, and good day to all of you. I just want to remind you what Susan Collins and Jeff Flake said late yesterday. Collins praised the FBI for what she considered a very thorough investigation. Jeff Flake said no corroborating evidence. Mitch McConnell followed that with his speech about 20 minutes ago. And David, why don't we begin with you? What is your expectation now as we await a final vote?
Well, there are two senators you're going to look at. One is a Democrat who voted yes on moving the vote, and that's Mr. Manchin. Apparently, he heard a lot from his constituents in West Virginia. He is in a very heavy pro-Trump state. Over 40% of his constituents voted for Donald Trump in the last election, so he is really in the spotlight. He voted yesterday. He could vote no tomorrow on the final vote. But then you have Ms. Murkowski, Senator Murkowski, who voted no today. Is it conceivable that you could vote no on a move for the vote, on the cloture move, and vote yes tomorrow? That is rarely, if ever, done. Maybe Ed Henry would know more about the history on that. But the fact is what is she going to hear from her constituents in Alaska between now and tomorrow at the time of the vote? Will she change from a no today to a yes on Kavanaugh tomorrow? It's an open question.
What about that, Ed?
I can't think of a case in a high-profile situation where you vote no now and then yes somehow for final passage. So I think David's right that Murkowski is highly unlikely to be yes for Kavanaugh. So what does that mean? Here's the math. If Murkowski stays no tomorrow and Manchin potentially splits this and says to his constituents, look, I voted yes to move this forward. I don't like the division in Washington. I want to give the man a vote, but potentially votes no in final passage to appease Democrats, tries to split the baby. Let's assume that for a moment. And Collins and Flake, who both voted aye, yes to move this forward, if they hold on final passage, you are at 49 tomorrow evening. You are not at 50. You're at 49, and you need Senator Daines from Montana to get to 50 and then have Vice President Pence break the tie. So basically, Bill and Sandra, call the caterer, get his daughter in the wedding. We either got to move it to Mar-a-Lago, we got to move it to the Senate chamber.
Trump could do it.
We got to do something.
Let me get to Capri quickly on this. If you think about Joe Manchin and what David's describing there, he's in a tough re-election battle here.
Right.
He's in a state that went overwhelmingly for President Trump. You grew up just across the border there in Ohio.
Right.
What does Joe Manchin do? He voted against tax reform. Is he now willing to vote against Brett Kavanaugh? And the same week where our own Fox polling shows a significant amount of movement on all these close races, especially in a place like North Dakota.
Right. Well,
what does he do based on that?
You bring up Heidi Heitkamp, which is very interesting, from North Dakota, and she basically said she's throwing up her hands and she's voting no, and it's not a political decision for her. She recognizes that may not help her in a re-election bid. Joe Manchin, I think, is making a different calculus here potentially. I do agree with Ed that he could, quote unquote, split the baby and, move forward with the procedural vote. What I think is going to happen now, and I think this is where Joe Manchin is really going to have to weigh his priorities. The people of West Virginia obviously have supported Donald Trump, have gone from blue to red pretty significantly. All the counties in West Virginia went for Donald Trump in 2016. So it seems as if with the cloture vote, he is reflecting the views of the constituents of West Virginia. Now that he has done this, and now that there is time between right now and tomorrow's vote, you're going to see the activist wing of the Democratic Party, the progressives, really pile on Joe Manchin to try to figure out a way to get him in line with the rest of the Democrats. And he's going to have to decide who he wants to appease more, the people of West Virginia or the extreme parts of the Democratic Party. And I think that's really the choice that he's going to have to make in the next, less than 24 hours at this point.
Ed, you go back to the opening arguments that we heard from leaders in the Senate ahead of this vote taking place just a short time ago. Chuck Grassley lashing out at the left-wing groups that he said have tried to take down President Trump's nominee as nothing short of monstrous. Dianne Feinstein of California said a man filled with anger and aggression. He is unfit for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh. These were just some of the words that were thrown out there before this vote took place.
I go back to June 28th of this year, right when all this opened up and President Trump was going to have the nomination at the beginning of July. Chris Matthews was on MSNBC. I checked it. Quote, "This is the time for vengeance." And I think that's what the left has done in this debate. It's been even before the sexual assault claims, at the first hearings when they were talking substance, interruptions, constant delays, the screaming, let's go to restaurants and go after senators. And so why did Chris Matthews say that? In context, he said Democrats should do to Trump what McConnell did to Merrick Garland. So this is all about tit for tat. And so when I heard Chuck Schumer then say right before the vote, give us another conservative, Mr. President, there's another one without sexual assault allegations we could maybe support. No. Chuck Schumer, within minutes of the nomination on July 9th, said, I will oppose Judge Kavanaugh with everything I have. The Democrats have been opposed from the first one.
Ed Capri, David, stand by. It is 3 minutes past the hour of 11 o'clock in the morning here in New York, along with Sandra Smith. I'm Bill Hemmer. If you're just joining us, we have just watched a significant step in the confirmation process of Brett Kavanaugh, which may prove in the end his path to being confirmed as the 114th U.S. Supreme Court Justice. The vote was 51-49, and now we await a critical moment later today. 3 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon, Susan Collins, who advanced the motion a moment ago, will decide whether or not she's an up or down vote on Brett Kavanaugh's
We'll hear from her at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Manchin, Collins, Flake, all yeses. Murkowski was a no. Those were the four undecideds that we were waiting to hear from. By the way, the president just tweeting out at the conclusion of this vote, very proud of the U.S. Senate for voting yes to advance the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh. Team coverage with analysis from Chris Wallace in just a moment. First, John Roberts is at the White House, but first we go to Mike Emanuel on Capitol Hill. Mike, what a morning.
Sandra, Bill, good morning to you. Yeah, that's about as dramatic as things get on the United States Senate floor. No technology other than the microphone. You heard the individual senators in their voices say either yay or nay. And 3 of the 4 we were watching said yes. Now we'll be chasing them around Capitol Hill for the rest of the day to see whether Collins, Flake, and Manchin are all going to be yes on final confirmation. We will be listening very carefully to Collins' floor speech. Perhaps Flake and Manchin will also take to the floor. Lisa Murkowski was the wild card in all of this. A lot of people I've spoken with said they really didn't know where she stood. They felt like some conversations she might be a no, some conversations she could be a yes. Those close to this nomination say that they were encouraged that basically Susan Collins and Jeff Flake said they needed to see certain information. They spent a lot of time in the secure location looking at this FBI report about the allegations against Judge Brett Kavanaugh. And so those close to the nomination, those close to Mitch McConnell and Chairman Chuck Grassley say they are encouraged that basically what these senators have requested has been provided to them. They're not speaking for how they will finally vote, but they are hopeful with all the information they've requested and all the information they've received that they will be a yes on confirmation tomorrow. And you could hear a lot of the emotion this morning from Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and also Chairman Chuck Grassley, those close to them saying they've essentially left it all on the field. Sandra, Bill?
Expect more emotions to be flowing as that 30-hour window is now open, and we'll be hearing more from the senators.
Brett Kavanaugh, age 53, his wife Ashley. We know that Brett Kavanaugh left his home about 2 hours ago. Where he's headed, we do not know. 2 young daughters, ages 10 and 13. They have figured prominently now in the public specter of what we have watched now for the past 2 weeks plus. Brett Kavanaugh, late yesterday, an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that some have considered his closing argument to be confirmed at the U.S. Supreme Court. In that, he admitted that perhaps he got a little too emotional during his hearing, but said that he was defending his honor, his name, and was speaking on behalf of his wife, his kids, and his 2 parents, his mother and father, in that hearing room yesterday. 1 week ago Thursday. John Roberts from the White House now has more on what we're picking up from the president when you're in the West Wing. Hey, John.
And we'll give you a little bit more of Brett Kavanaugh's op-ed in just a second, because it is an important aspect here in the whole White House attempt to win over enough senators to get this across the finish line. I spoke with a source here in the administration about the vote that just took place to say, what about Murkowski? Do you think you can get her back? I was told no, she's probably gone, that they're probably not going to be able to convince Lisa Murkowski of Alaska to vote for Judge Kavanaugh, particularly after voting no for the cloture vote. They do think that they'll be able to hang on to Joe Manchin, and they do believe that Joe Manchin will, and he's in a tight race in West Virginia, though he does lead by about 9 points. They believe that Manchin will vote for Judge Kavanaugh. They also think that Flake and Collins are on board as well. So with Senator Steve Daines of Montana out in Montana tomorrow for the wedding of his daughter, that means they've got 50 votes. They could go 50-49, and that gives them a win. But if they need to bring Senator Daines back and keep the vote open, they will do that as well. Now, part of the concern with Kavanaugh over the last 7 days has been his temperament and his tone during that hearing last week. So Judge Kavanaugh tried to address that today in that Wall Street Journal op-ed that you mentioned, Bill, off the top of this, in which he said, "My testimony reflected my overwhelming frustration at being wrongly accused. I might have been too emotional at times, and I said a few things I should not have said. I hope everyone can understand that I was there as a son, a husband, and a dad. Going forward, you can count on me to be the same kind of judge and person I have been for my entire 28-year legal career, hardworking, even-keeled, open-minded, independent, and dedicated to the Constitution and the public good." We don't know if that has helped Senator Collins and Senator Flake be more comfortable with voting for him. But the way the White House believes they have the vote right now, they lose Murkowski, they gain Manchin, they get him across the finish line. Bill?
And keep Collins.
And keep Collins, yeah.
John Roberts, thank you from the North Lawn.
For more, let's bring in Fox News Sunday anchor Chris Wallace. He joins us now. Chris, I'm sure you've been watching every minute. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, how extraordinarily dramatic it is to see that kind of a roll call when you don't know what the outcome is going to be, and it's on an issue of such importance as in this case, ending the filibuster for a Supreme Court nomination, keeping the nomination alive, and to see anybody who's come to Washington as a tourist and sat in the Senate gallery, usually it's empty, and there are a couple of senators walking around, but to see all 100 senators in their chairs, at their desks, all of them voting in a roll call where you didn't know how it was going to turn out is really dramatic. So that is point one. Point two, it seems to me that this nomination is still on a razor's edge because, as has been pointed out by some of my colleagues, it doesn't always follow. I think Murkowski is gone. I don't see how somebody votes no on ending debate and then votes yes on the nomination. But people do sometimes vote yes to end the debate and then vote no on the actual nomination. And so this really does come down to a couple of key votes. For instance, let's say that Collins were to announce today at 3 p.m. that she's going to vote no on the actual nomination tomorrow. Well, then you say you got Manchin, you're still going to get to 50. Yes, Steve Daines has to fly back from his daughter's wedding in Montana. But that raises the question about Manchin. Everybody thought that Manchin might well vote for Kavanaugh if his vote weren't needed. In other words, if he weren't the key vote to put it over the top. But if Collins votes no, then Manchin is the difference between success or failure here. And if he votes no, then the nomination is gone. So it seems to me this is still on a razor's edge.
We are hearing that Joe Manchin's about to put out a statement. Apparently that's what he's telling reporters in Capitol Hill. Chris, and you think about what his political calculus is. He has what appears to be an 8-point lead over Patrick Morrisey, the current Attorney General in West Virginia. And if what I referenced 10 minutes ago is the movement in that North Dakota poll, you know politicians pay attention to these numbers, and he has to be looking at that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I met with a Republican senator yesterday, and I asked him why Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota would vote no, because she announced yesterday she was going to vote no on Kavanaugh, which would be an unpopular vote in a state that favors Donald Trump so heavily. In the latest Fox News poll, she's down by 12 points, and I don't who knows what's in Heidi Heitkamp's mind. Some people suggest maybe she voted no because that's her conscience. One hopes that's the decision. But this Republican senator has suggested to me maybe she understands she's not going to win anyway, that the race is lost, and she's decided she wants to vote where her supporters are because it's not going to make a difference in her election. That's a very different situation from Joe Manchin. This is clearly going to be a very key political calculation, in addition to a calculation of what his principles are and what he believes when it comes to Brett Kavanaugh.
What do you think brought at least these three undecided senators to a yes, and I say at least today in this procedural vote? We'll see what happens tomorrow in the statements that are about to be made and come out on behalf of some of them. You know, what got them to that point, you think? I mean, you had the president in that campaign rally. You had the Wall Street Journal op-ed written by Judge Kavanaugh said I said a few things I should not have. Do you think there was any one thing that helped push some of those senators to a yes?
Yes, I do. I think it's the FBI investigation. And I think that, you know, with this 1 week extended FBI background check, and you heard the Democrats, a lot of complaints. It wasn't thorough. They didn't talk to everybody that they could have, didn't pursue all the leads. But the fact is that they did a 1 week investigation. They talked to 9 witnesses. They got a written statement from a 10th. They did pursue people on both the Ramirez charge, the Yale charge, as well as the Christine Blasey Ford charge. And there was no corroboration from either of the female accusers. So I think that was, and it was interesting yesterday after Susan Collins said, look, I think this is a thorough investigation. Late yesterday afternoon, she went into the SCIF, the secure, compartmentalized, secure area where they had 1 copy of the report, and she spent 2 hours reading it. And I think that in the end, that gave both her and Flake and probably Manchin, who also spent time yesterday and this morning in the SCIF reading it, satisfaction that there is not something out there. Obviously, people are always going to complain that you could have done more in an investigation, but the fact that this came back with a clean bill of health, I think, was probably the deciding factor.
Chris Wallace, thank you very much, and be sure to tune into Fox News Sunday this weekend. Chris will be joined by Senate Judiciary Committee member Lindsey Graham, along with RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. That is happening Sunday, 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on Fox News Channel. Thanks to Chris.
Definitely check that out. So where are we right now? The numbers are in. Brett Kavanaugh moving on to the final phase of his confirmation battle. The Senate has voted to end debate on his nomination, 51-49, the final tally at the moment. There are a number of things to watch, including the clock. By rules, the Senate has about 30 hours to debate this, but we should know more within moments when Joe Manchin delivers his statement. We're waiting for that. And then Susan Collins a few hours from now. So we'll